All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time on behalf of Lou Yang engaging with us in this working group on assessment. We have a full schedule today, so I'm going to get right into this. Today, my plan is to have about a 40-60 or 50-50 mixture of me talking and you actually having a chance to work on something and share your own learnings. Last time, if you were here, you remember that it was mostly me talking. Today, we're going to get a slightly more even balance because we have things to work on now, which is wonderful. All right, so I wanted to start off with a few reminders quickly. The first reminder is that we have a variety of resources on the virtual G Drive. And this is just a screenshot here of the main folder architecture. So on the left-hand side, you can see that in the main folder, there is the AISC report. We talked about that last week, and I made sure that now all the files are accessible. So all the subfolders that have files from the initiatives and from the different case studies, you could look at those now if you wanted to. Then there's a meetings folder. I'm going to get to the literature one in a second. There's a meetings folder that has three subfolders for the three meetings in it that always has the slides in it and any additional information that are meeting specific. We have some materials specifically for the United We Learn initiative, and then we have also the bios there, and then we have a big folder with literature. And on the right-hand side here, you can see different areas of literature thematically organized that are relevant to our work more broadly, that I've organized for you based on the survey that you had responded to before we met for the very first time. And in each of these folders, there is, somewhere between 2 to 3, sometimes it's like 10 resources that hopefully will help you learn something about these subject matters if you are so inclined. All right, quick. And so if you look at the slide deck later, the link here at the bottom, that looks like an underlined text right now, that's actually also active in case you've forgotten where that G Drive location is. You can click on that and then get directly put to there. Remember, the three goals that we've had for our working group are to develop foundational design principles for a future-oriented state assessment system. The second one is to work on a draft of a theory of action around the state assessment system. And then the third one is more personal for all of you to learn some concepts related to assessment and accountability. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing that I did last week, which is that I will present you with a lot of light touch big ideas that are connected to resources that exist to help you just maybe remember or integrate, hopefully, a few ideas that are related to the big picture around assessment and accountability, given that we only have 3 hours together. All right. The proposed timeline, we are in the second of 3 weeks. Technically, it's a 4-week cycle, but next week we won't meet. So as you can imagine, time is tight. So today, at the end, you're going to be left with a little bit of a homework activity that you can hopefully complete before we meet next time, and then I can do something with that, so that during the final meeting, we're going to get together and come to some kind of, like, I don't want to say closure, but maybe intermittent closure. How about that? That might be a good term for this. We're going to start in particular working on a theory of action today, but at the beginning, we're going to start by comparing a few of the state assessment approaches that you may have had a chance to look at. And so this is what we're going to do today. We're going to start out with a little bit of a share out or report out on the system example comparisons. And then we're going to talk about foundational considerations like we did last time. Today, I want to talk briefly about federal requirements and technical quality perspectives onto assessments. And then finally, we're going to start talking about some systems descriptions of assessment systems. And I want to remind you of some of the things we said in the CGSA, the Competitive Grant for State Assessment, that funds part of this work. And then I want to get started on the theory of action with you. All right. With that said, I want us to start a little bit with a report out on learnings. And so here is what you were asked to do last time. There was a please do, a nice to do, and if you're really motivated. The please do was look at some examples of assessment systems in other states. There were 2 overview articles down here that I had provided to you, and some other resources obviously exist. And note what you appreciate about these, what you find problematic, and what you think Kentucky can learn from them. And then the nice to do was to also articulate maybe some design principles or other kinds of foundational considerations or abstractions, whatever language you want to use here in the moment, that derive from those examples. And then the third piece was to take that language and maybe some of the other language that we've had around design principles that were on the slide deck last time, and see how you might even try to get a handle on evaluating how these examples might be aligned with those foundational design principles and the associated longer term goals. So what I've gotten from you all is really, I've gotten only 2 people who've sent me something, so it looks like you're all very busy. So Lee, you were nice enough to upload a document where you looked at South Carolina and Idaho. And Lisa, who will hopefully join us here in a few minutes as well, she looked also at South Carolina and Utah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give the floor for starters to you, Lee, and just have you talk a little bit about these characteristics, and maybe start off by saying, why did you pick South Carolina and Idaho? Was there anything in particular that you found that motivated you to do that? And if not, that's fine, then just go into the example, but always good to ask that question. And let's start with, like I said I think I said this in my email to you personally, like 2 to 3 minutes or so for starters. Since we only have 2 people, if you go a little bit over, it's fine, but just roughly there. You mind doing that?
Okay, I'll be glad to do that.
Awesome.
It was a lot of reading material, I have to say. I picked South Carolina and Idaho because they both have made quite a bit of progress toward getting almost through the whole process. Just starting with Idaho, their legislature had committed to an education system that was based on mastery of competencies and not just seat time. And I do make comments on both of these, that these are heavily Republican states, and I tend to think that some of the conservatism out there now would be wanting to do more like what we've always done. But that statement is pretty broad and embracing of going to a mastery approach. The thing that impressed me in Idaho was their education framework. It's very student focused. They start out by saying they want the student to participate in their own educational process, and they want the learning then to be personalized to that student. And they give a part of their framework as a college and career readiness competencies, where they list 10 different things that need to be accomplished and have 6 levels of decision that go into those. Just check and make sure that so you've got a college and career readiness competency listing of, I think, 10 different topics that they want to check on. And then they say that for each one of those, you can apply 6 levels of performance to decide whether they are being achieved or not. And to me, that was a pretty good list of specificity to get from that process, through that process. What I didn't understand is that they didn't do a profile of a graduate. In realizing what Kentucky has done, I wonder if they really got out in the population and tried to get inputs from the population in general, or they've done this mainly from a top-down approach, which I don't think would be as strong. So I do think their framework and the way that they develop their competency list could be something we could benefit from. In South Carolina, they got a lot of flexibility to develop innovative practices, much like we did with the area of innovation. They did develop a profile of South Carolina graduates, and they again had 12 detailed competencies that they had listed that they wanted to target. One thing that I was impressed with is that they formed an Office of Personalized Learning, which offers professional development for the educators who are going to participate in these student-centered learning strategies. And I wonder whether they just put the professional development, which I think is a highly neglected thing in Kentucky, if they just put in money for teachers who had chosen to go this route of the new approach and neglected to provide any professional development from the other teachers who have problems that they need to be learning about as well, and could cause some form of a dichotomy in those who are kind of with the new system and those who are not. But again, they did go through what I thought was a pretty detailed approach to start defining how they would how they would assess whether the student was progressing or not, and providing the flexibility to get away from the time requirements that are in the state legislature previously to give them the flexibility to do something more innovative. Again, I would think one thing Kentucky could learn, given our relationship with our legislature, is how did they manage to get the legislature to step up and get behind something that's pretty innovative, because we seem to have focused on things that are not very innovative, much more cultural. So those are the two that I chose. I like the others, but there were shortcomings in some of the others, I guess, that moved me toward these two states.
Is there a particular shortcoming that stands out for you in the other examples where that would sort of inspire you to say, well, this is not something we would really want in Kentucky, or maybe for these two states here?
I'm going to have to look back through my notes, because I got a whole lot of marked up pages in here.
Yeah.
I just think many of them just had not gone as fully through the process of.
Right. Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to give you a chance to speak about that too, because, sometimes, we learn from contrast as well, right? We learn from both the aspects that inspire us and the things that transfer, but also from the things that don't transfer. Does anybody have a reaction about the things that Lee shared in terms of what's maybe already done? I would have a few reaction in terms of like sort of what, based on what Kentucky seems to be already doing, how that's similar, or more dissimilar. Anybody want to share anything, or that this makes them think of? What about the point about teacher professionalization, for example, or teacher training, education, further development, whatever language you consider to be most appropriate for that? So Lee, you were saying that you think that in Kentucky, for example, that's maybe somewhat of a neglected aspect. It's of course something that is really important for the successful implementation of assessments. Do others in this committee, for example, share that perspective, or do you feel like there's particular aspects that are in fact strong, in particular as they relate to sort of the design and implementation of assessments?
Andre, I want to jump in. I'd also done South Carolina, and one thing I put in my notes was that I think that we could learn a lot from that state as far as professional development goes. Could we possibly, take some people from Kentucky and go to South Carolina and find out, what are you doing as far as the professional development, and how could we learn from that? So possibility. Yeah.
What stood out to you on that front, for example, on the professional front, what South Carolina was doing that you liked and appreciated in particular?
Yeah, let me look through my, I apologize for my tardiness to the meeting. I tell you what, car rider line at the middle school. And that's exactly what I'd said. I about the professional development opportunities that, we could really learn from them doing this. Let's see.
While you're looking at that, Lisa, let me just say that one area of professional development that our teachers are getting are through grants and contracts. It's not as if it's a statewide deal. The commissioner and I went down to see a teacher that was teaching a new approach to STEM education. And she told us, she said, I taught for 23 years and I thought I was really good, but until I had this coursework, I didn't realize that I wasn't teaching them how to think. I was wanting to tell them the answers before they left the room.
Exactly.
And so we're doing some ad hoc professional development for those who get grants, but I'm not sure we've got across the board professional development. It was actually taken away out of the budget a couple of years ago, Adrian, that you may or may not know. And with the massive change we're trying to bring about, it's vitally important that we provide some development across the board.
Right, I agree.
Lisa, is there anything else that you want to share about Utah, South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out looking for, okay, what states would interest me the most? I'm originally from Indiana, so I was really looking for something on Indiana. And, you know, I'm sure if I dug really deep, I could find something, but in the documents I found, what we had, I just didn't see anything. So, so then I started looking at, there was in one document, there was kind of an outline of, does this state have profile of a learner? Yes or no? And
Yes.
so I went through that and I thought, okay, so I know Kentucky is, you know, going that route. We have a profile of a learner. Districts are now getting into that implementation. And so I wanted to look at a state that already has it. And so of course, South Carolina stood out to me. You know, let's see, I'm gonna try to look at my notes again. You know, obviously we can, you know, we learn a lot from just that full implementation of the profile. I said, I like the autonomy that is given to school districts to try something more innovative, since this is more of a flexible governance, you know, for the schools. I think that's great. You know, my concerns for that was, you know, if a school district has multiple high schools, you know, how do you pick, you know, would all the high schools do it, or would just one high school do it? Would that create competition among the schools, or would you have to be forced to do like an open enrollment if parents want to say, well, I want to send my kid that does that kind of innovating thinking compared to this other school? So, you know, that was just kind of my concerns with that. You know, obviously, if you're living in a smaller community, you have one high school, or, you know, I mean, obviously you don't have to do this at a high school, but, you know, I just think that way, and, you know, we could just do it, you know, do it in that one school. Let's see, it says let's see, what could Kentucky learn from it? The South Carolina has a comprehensive resource guide for school districts to use. And it said it provides many exemptions, options, and waiver opportunities to encourage innovative approaches to learning. So this helps districts to encourage options and provide steps to personalize learning to make students achieve that profile of a graduate. So I think that, you know, again, that's something that, you know, we could look at as a state. And, you know, I'm a teacher, you know, teachers, the biggest thing we like to do is steal from others. So.
Hey, as long as it's open source, right?
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's right. You know, I mean, as long as I get permission, I mean, yeah.
All right. There's a few. Thank you so much for sharing this. There's a few things that you said I really appreciate, and I think that you both said. So one seed that I want to plant with you is when we go later to the theory of action conversation, it's really about thinking through the entire system of around a particular action or decision. And so, for example, the idea of saying, you know, like we might want to institute a new version of a system where we have common performance assessment tests. Let's see, somebody said they wanted to play with that idea, right? Not saying that anybody has made that decision, but they're saying you want to play with that idea. This idea of then saying, well, you know, what might be unintended negative consequences that we want to try to think about and maybe see whether we can mitigate that. You talked about competition. What are the connections between that and what is needed on the place of implementation and teacher training, assessment literacy? What are some assumptions that I need to make, or some resources, let's say, maybe it's easier to think about that I need. So we're going to think that through later. For now, I want to say to the others who haven't had maybe a chance to look at the case studies in particular, Lee and Lisa actually uploaded their notes, or I uploaded their notes that they provided into the folder under system examples within the literature. So you can all look at their notes, and of course the resources are still there. So if you didn't have a chance to look at those in the last week, you know, feel free to. They're going to be there for you know, as long as you have access to the folder. So it's never too late to maybe look at some examples. And I'm going to share with you a few additional resources today that hopefully will be useful for you as well. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on now. I want to talk quickly about a few foundational considerations. The first part is federal requirements, and I want to talk about that very briefly just to give you a few entrance points into that space, because again, not all of you have had the same kind of experience at the same level of detail or from the same angle to this. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that I curated for you and the way you might look at these. So the first piece is that there is actually a law. So there's the ESSA law, and you can actually access that. So I put the copy of that into the folder as well. So this is the raw language, which sometimes, you know, is good for people to actually remind themselves of, right? Because it's easy to sort of say like, oh, there's this law, and I've heard people talk second, third, fourth hand about this, but sometimes it's good to just go back and say like, what does the law actually say? But then if that's too technical, there's other derivatives. So Jennifer and her team have put together three documents, really, two of them in draft form. One has been approved, where they compare what is federally required by ESSA and what the Kentucky revised statute is saying, and then how that connects to the assessments that are currently in place. So this is, for example, a snapshot of taken from a two-pager. You see at the bottom, it's called KBE 2023C, and so A, B, C are the three documents. I put those into the federal requirements folder. And so, for example, you can see something like, I think the second row is a good example, where ESSA does not require a college admissions exam specifically, but then the Kentucky revised statute has a stipulation about having a college admission examination to assess English, reading, mathematics, and science in the spring of grade 11. And the chosen exam currently is the ACT. So just understanding sort of like what is required either federally or by state legislation, and then what is currently being done is helpful sometimes for certain considerations. Another document, I took this from here, is showing the different indicators that ESSA requires and that Kentucky requires. Academic indicators, ELP indicators, school quality, student success indicators for elementary, middle, and high school. So there's an overview that we have for that. And then there is also a document that you all have, which is the overview of the accountability system as it currently exists. So here, for example, I took those two is snapshots of the weights that different indicators have in the system currently for different school, I'm going to call them school types, elementary, middle, and high today. And also here's a color-coded classification scheme just to get the rationale across, to say what is the relation between status and change for specific indicators, and what kind of patterns are sort of more desirable, less desirable, and then that gets translated via cut scores into scores, and that gets all aggregated up into an indicator. But so there's overviews that exist that we currently have at that level. And then there is another perspective on the issue of what is federally required that has to do with peer review, right? So this idea of demonstrating to the US government that the assessments that are in use meet essentially professional quality standards. And so this is from an overview. There's a guide that the US Department of Ed has for federal peer review. And then also, again, Jennifer and her colleagues have created sort of a more sort of short and sweet, accessible entry point into understanding what this means. And I like this graphic. I mean, it's not my favorite graphic, but it's a bit busy, but I do like it because it shows you essentially the different aspects of assessments here that you have to consider. And then these standards are called critical elements. And if you've ever designed or implemented or evaluated an assessment, it's essentially that kind of work and making sure that you demonstrate that you have a trustworthy and robust system. So that needs to be done. And, you know, the feds will evaluate for you whether your system, substantially meets or partially meets, ideally, these requirements, or and then, you know, you have to submit plans as a state to provide additional evidence. So here's the description that Jennifer and her colleagues provided. So the state must provide evidence that, and then you see here essentially those common descriptors that you often see for assessments in the sort of more traditional vein of what we consider to be assessments. Jennifer, do you want to say anything by any chance about like essentially maybe the ecosystem into which these documents are embedded and what the process is for. I think you're in the middle of approving 2 of them, right? Anything else you want to add?
Sure, Andre. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, or we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Let me see. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties.
Yeah, you're a little bit of an echo there, yeah. Yeah. Is that me? Let me put myself on.
No, it's me. There we go. I think I've got it now.
Super, yeah.
I've got a loaner computer and it is giving me fits. So as Andre mentioned, we have these documents that we have developed so that it's easy to digest. There are requirements from the federal government for both assessment and separately for accountability. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to make those easy to understand in simple terms. There are lots of details behind each of these. As Andre mentioned, there are technical qualities that the assessments have to go through and achieve in order to be in compliance. Now, as Andre mentioned, he showed the ESSA, the law, and it is around meeting the requirements of that Title I for federal monies. So all of the things that we do to demonstrate to the U.S. Department of Education that Kentucky is meeting these requirements is connected to those federal title funds. So if you look at this this law, you see that it has Title I Part A, Title I Part B. So you see the where specifically those funds are connected to. So we have to demonstrate that we meet the technical qualities to demonstrate to the department through a peer review process that is involved, and we have to demonstrate through evidence and provide specific documentation that we are meeting those technical qualities and provide those evidences. We have to do the same thing for the accountability as well. So and the way that we do the accountability is through our ESSA Consolidated State Plan. So we have right now, our state plan has been submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, and we are in negotiation back and forth with them. They have specific questions because they have the guidelines that states must meet in order to be in compliance. So we have to make sure that we are in alignment with their expectations. And it's a back and forth between the department and KBE at this point.
Thank you so much for
So
that
Andre, I'll turn
additional-
it back over to you.
Yeah, that's in the interest of time, I think that's great. And it shows that this really, first of all, the tight connection between assessment and accountability. And so when we have a working group on assessment, I find it's very hard to think about assessment in isolated terms, even though there's particular processes, like you said, that have specific to assessments. But very quickly, I think if we think about this systemically, we have to think about the accountability aspects of the work as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And let's talk quickly about technical quality considerations. And I wanted to just throw a few ideas out there that hopefully get you thinking in different ways about technical quality for assessment processes. Remember, this is the Kentucky Portrait of a Learner graphic with the verbal descriptions of the different persona and underlying competencies. So the engaged citizen, the critical thinker, and so on and so forth. So when people talk about technical quality, it's always good to have a conversation with them to say sort of like, what do you specifically mean? Jennifer was just talking about, that there's very standardized procedures from the US Department of Ed about what technical quality means for assessment and the accountability system and what needs to be documented and so on and so forth. But when we talk at the space of assessment and instruction, we talk about pedagogical incentive approaches in that, it often looks a little bit different. So I wanted to show you just what representation that you may have seen or you may find useful. So for example, if you're in the mindset of thinking about project-based learning and you're thinking about performance tasks and maybe associated with that, defenses of learning or exhibitions of learning, you often think about these elements here. So this is the gold standard PBL model with 7 essential project design elements. In the other working group on instruction, they actually took these and they looked at different resources and started talking through what it might mean to implement this consistently. And you can see here that there you might talk about the fact that a task that is of high quality is a task that has a high degree of authenticity, for example, allows students to ask or address challenging problems or questions, allows them to reflect on their practices with their peers, by themselves, with teacher guidance. There's an opportunity for critique and revision and so on and so forth, right? It's a very different kind of thinking about sort of the essential desirable properties of tasks for learning with often an assessment flavor or component. Now, another way of looking at this is sort of to say, like, well, what if I picked something like an event that is related to project-based learning? So for example, let's say we are thinking about defenses of learning, or again, exhibitions of learning. You may have even a slightly different name for that in your environment, or in your, if you're listening in your district or in your school. But the point is, there's some cumulative experience, and let's focus for a moment on the ones that might be in marker grades like 5, 8, and 11. And so you could say, well, you know, we have thought about these sort of quality characteristics for the task, but now we're having these really comprehensive and rich defenses and events. So what do we need to think about there, right? And so here's a list of example features that, for example, I curated from both the literature, also my own experience, just to illustrate some of the design decisions that have to be made that affect the quality of these events. So this has everything to do from things like, you know, what are the task features? That's very much related to the PBL Works graphic that you just saw, the work products that are being produced, but there's also things to think about that have to do with scalability, right? Like what kind of artifacts are being collected, how are they being stored, can they be annotated, and all of that. The scoring rubrics that are being used, if scores are provided as part of the process. If you have panels of people who provide feedback and also may make some kind of a judgment about the performance, you know, what's the expertise of the panel members? How is it composed? Is it representative of the stakeholder population? You know, what is the process for putting these together? Then is there any kind of like training or like onboarding for the people to sort of like level set expectations? Databases, often people will talk about like, hey, we're building up a video library, right, of these performances, and that is a very valuable tool, obviously. But there's design decisions behind the scenes, sort of like, you know, what do you capture in these videos? How do you annotate them? Are the videos representative of the entire range of performances? Are they also representative of the diversity of the approaches and the learner populations? So there's things that one can talk about, think through there. And then, you know, if it goes to feedback, like what are the mechanisms for providing feedback? Is the feedback, you know, what's the complexity, appropriateness, and so on and so forth. And it goes all the way. I stopped here at the point of pedagogical initiatives, you know, so how is this aligned with opportunities that students had within a given curriculum or course, or across different curricula and courses, depends on which grades you're in. So you can take all of that apart. I'm not saying that that needs to be done in every moment, but I've encountered, I think I said this last time, several districts who really are highly motivated to sort of improve their practices from these perspectives. I'm working with Adam from Shelby County right now to start documenting some of this, and he is very highly motivated and interested. For example, I don't think he's the only one, right? We have people who have done this many years. And so there are common ways, common kinds of questions that one can ask that also have to do with the quality of this. And it's just a different sense and different aspect of quality. So I wanted to share that. And then in our CGSA application in the appendix, we talked about the aspect of, we called it managing variability in standardized assessment, which is sort of one perspective on the issue of comparability. And you see here, there was this idea of how do we talk about the comparability of multiple tasks, multiple forms, multiple assessments. And we sort of walk that through. So again, a slightly different kind and a very specific kind of perspective on saying what happens if we want to look across. And that's a language that I've been using with colleagues in this space. So sometimes, there's a lot of negative connotations when people say, technical quality comparability. Often the assumption is it has to be exclusively, for example, for federal compliance, or it has to be exclusively using very narrow traditional metrics and approaches that are associated with assessment methods that people want to move away from. I don't think that is true. I think the question is who, in what condition, in what situations has a desire to look across different kinds of events or situations with some kind of a common quote unquote lens. And whenever people want to do that, you have to wrestle a little bit about like what the lens is, how you talk about and capture aspects that are common, aspects that are not common, how do you explain what's systematic, how you explain what's that's called, I was going to say noisy, that's very technical, but what's desirable, what's not so desirable. So I want to encourage us to sort of try to not make immediate assumptions about potential negative connotations, but just say, what is it that we want to know and how do we go about knowing that? Finally, before we move on to our little exercise with you, this is a graphic I showed you last time. Again, if you want to talk about technical quality, you can also talk about technical quality of the implementation and maintenance of particular systems. So this is related to the accountability system and the the consolidated state plan in part, which is really, this is a graphic that sort of talks about all the kind of things that might be going on behind the scenes, technically and from a data governance perspective. And then there's people like my colleague Juan de Brood or Laura Pensignot, who have written about, along with, of course, others in the field, have written about sort of how you implement these systems in a way that connect the accountability and the desired state changes for improving school practice to local behaviors or local efforts for doing school improvement and school management. And on that note, I want to quickly mention a few things that I learned when I was at a different group. So I attended the working group on, excuse me, now I'm blanking on accountability, mindset, and structures. I was looking for that word in my brain. And they had a really wonderful discussion on Tuesday. And so this are some of the things that they said they would like to see in the assessment and accountability system in the future. And if you just like scan that, right, you see that these are things that I would imagine resonate with several of you. They also are aligned to the United We Learn. And so I just wanted to share these with you to sort of say, if when you start working on a theory of action, maybe there's some language here that you feel resonates with you. And also to sort of build that little bridge between this committee and the other committees. I did put a quote in the bottom that I thought was just so wonderful. I've observed Claude Christian, your colleague, several times now, and I always think he has such a beautiful way of expressing ideas personally. And so he said this in a chat. So how can we move away from achievement to accomplishments, where achievement is just the completion of a task that's imposed from the outside, with the reward often being a path to the next achievement. Accomplishment, though, is the end point of an engulfing activity chosen by a student whose reward is the sudden rush of fulfillment, the sense of happiness that rises uniquely from absorption in a thing outside ourselves. So I thought that was a really beautiful way of capturing sort of the broadening of the competencies and the task designs and the humanistic goals also that we have for learners. So one more thing quickly, and then I'll put you into groups. I want to point out that when we're thinking about theories of action, there are representations that relate to this in the competitive grant for state assessment. So for those of you who are interested in that, you have access to the full application. Actually, let me skip this. So there's a complicated diagram that we had cooked up at the time we submitted the application. It's slightly modified, but it still actually captures a lot about like the architecture of, you don't have to read this now, it's just like the architecture of like the working relationships, the supports that we have, and some outcomes that were envisioned for the system. So that's a real direction of work that Kentucky has federal funding for. There's also a description of a theory of action in a what I might call a little bit more compact and simpler form, because you see these are all like arrows pointing to the middle, and there's not that much directionality in complicated relationships, but it is puts a few language around a few key pillars for the desires that were articulated for the system. And then I'm going to go back quickly. I want to point out this is hot off the press. I read this today. It's a wonderful document from Knowledge Works. So it's Lillian Pace and Jonathan Alforth in our teams. It's called a state opportunity analysis, which is essentially reviewing all of the different policies and parameters that currently exist and what Kentucky is doing, might be doing in the future. It's not broadly shareable, but I checked and I was allowed to share that with you. So I uploaded this also into the folder of resources. And I have to say personally, I think this is kind of required reading for everybody who is on the board and on the working group. I think this is a wonderful document. And so I just highly recommend you spend some time looking at that as well. It's a great overview. With that in mind, what I like to quickly do is I like to talk about theories of action. So quick note on evidence-based reasoning. Theories of actions are about reasoning with evidence, right? Or getting us there, essentially taking a systemic snapshot of a particular system that we care about. So it could be the entire educational system in Kentucky. It could be the accountability system in Kentucky. It could be the assessment system components of the broader system. It could be an individual assessment. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to focus and foreground, I mean, to use that word, the assessment perspective. And what I like to do is I like to actually skip this. You can read this later. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. And what I like to do is I like to get you thinking for just a few minutes a little bit about this theory of action kind of idea. I see Rhonda and Jennifer here noted as being present. Meredith, did you have a chance to put other people into teams?
I did, and on my version of the slide, I can see everyone check, so I don't know what's happened, but they are all in room and ready to go when, yes, okay. They're ready to go.
Then let me describe the task to everybody. So the task that I want you to play with, and I know it feels a bit rushed. We just don't have that much time. This is the task. I hope you can see the spreadsheet. Yeah, is that right? Can then somebody say yay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. So created the spreadsheet here. This is a spreadsheet that essentially lists different things you have to think about when you're thinking about articulating what your theory of action of a system is. You may have seen graphical representations. This is a table approach. The table approach has certain trade-offs, but it also has certain things that make it advantageous. And what makes it advantageous is you can start with essentially anywhere in the table with an entry point that is most useful to you. So for example, if you're someone who likes thinking about the future and about goals, you can start off saying like, I have an idea for a long-term goal or maybe a shorter-term goal that I think we want to pursue. If you're more an action-oriented person, you can start with an activity. You can say, what if we did X? Or if you're a people person and you think a lot about the people that are affected, you could say, what are some of the ideal positive effects that I might want to create through something, and start there, right? And if you are, lastly, if you are someone who works in an office and has a lot of like budgets to review. You could even say, well, what are some of the resources and facilitators or constraints and barriers that we're currently working on, and start listing there. The point is, for a few minutes, we'll pair you up, and we like you to pick one idea. It doesn't really matter what it is, because it's just to illustrate the thinking and just touch, a light touch with this task. Take one idea in your pair, write it down, don't overthink it, just pick an entry point, and then go down the row into both directions, wherever you are, and just try to put a few thoughts down and see whether that kind of articulation works for you and what you're wrestling with. Doesn't have to be easy, or can be easy, it's fun. All right, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to hop a little bit between rooms for a few minutes, and then we're going to come back together very briefly. And actually, you know what? I'm pausing. Let me pause. We're not going to come back together because it's already 4:50. My goodness, time is so fast. It's 4:50, so we're going to put you into these groups. And the task for next week, you will see this in the slide deck, is essentially to continue doing this work, review what other people have done, and then I will synthesize this for you in a visual and also in narrative form in some way. I'll see what sort of works best. And then in the next meeting that we have, we'll sort of take a look at that together and discuss it a little bit more, and hopefully come to some kind of form of consensus and disagreement. All right, with that, we'll put you into the groups. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you there at least for a few minutes.